you've been vocal about how terribly some of the West, like I said, even independent media has covered Syria and West Asia. What do you see as the main issue in their coverage, and why?
Actually, there are multiple problems in the coverage. First of all, let's put the mainstream media aside because it's not a coverage. It's a pure propaganda when it comes to Syria. But when we talk about the independent, especially anti-imperialist left-wing media outlets in the West, there are a few problems. First of all, a lot of people in the independent media are more or less careerists, and they want to make a career on YouTube or on Twitter. Therefore, they try to sound like an objective, okay? So in order to surf in these waters of the social media, they repeat the talking points of a lot of mainstream media in order to look like they are professional. However, unfortunately, some of these people also visited Syria, and they received a journalistic visa, and they have seen with their own eyes that with the journalistic visa, they were cruising in the cities without any minders or someone following them or telling them what to cover and what not. And let's remember, Syria is still in a war situation. And despite that, they had a lot of freedom in their coverage and what to say and what not to say, despite the fact that some of them were also calling Syria like a brutal dictatorship, a police state, and in the past few years. But despite that, they received the visa because Syria is interested in getting in journalists, and Syria is interested not only in alternative media journalists, but also mainstream media journalists. And until this moment, the BBC has a correspondent in Damascus and other mainstream media outlets. The thing is, how to put the Syrian conflict into proper context. So some people say it's a civil war, which is completely wrong. Others say it's a proxy war, which is relatively true. It's basically a regime change war waged by the United States and its allies in the region, okay? Now, it has miserably failed from a geopolitical perspective, but socially, there are certain things that should be handled. But let's talk about the context. So when we talk about the issue in Syria as an imperialist war, okay, that means the forces that are fighting underground, who have received funding up to billions. We are talking about only Britain has spent around £500 million in Syria. Qatar has spent hundreds of millions of dollars. It's with billions, right? Israel, Saudi Arabia, all these rich countries, they have spent billions of dollars in Syria. Of course, they didn't spend this to bring democracy, right? They wanted to change the regime in Syria. Therefore, when any particular group in Syria, whether it's a political group or it's an armed group that opposes Assad and they're receiving this funding, they are losing the title of being an opposition, because they have become a tool in the hands of the United States and its allies in the region, including Israel, which is very important for Syria because Israel still occupies the Golan Heights. So when the government reacts against such groups, whether they are political or mostly are armed, and because of this funding, because of this support, and because the government knows that what's coming next because of these groups, this should be considered a war against the tools of the imperialists in Syria and not fighting its own people, despite the fact that some people who are fighting the government, they carry the Syrian passport. But that doesn't deny the fact that they are tools for the imperialists in Syria. So when you say, yes, it's an imperialist war, but Assad is killing his own people, you're already contradicting yourself. It's either an imperialist war on Syria, or it's either Assad is killing his own people. So it doesn't make sense to say it's an imperialist war, well knowing that these groups are tools for the imperialists, and at the same time you say it's killing his own people. The people who are fighting the government nowadays, yes, they were born in Syria, they have a Syrian passport, but if you read Arabic and you understand what they say in videos, and they are very vocal about this, they say it on YouTube, they say it on their social media accounts, they don't consider themselves Syrians. They feel like more Turks, like they consider Erdogan to be their ruler, because their identity, they have adopted an Islamist identity that is Erdogan is spreading in the region. Therefore, their loyalty is no more to their macro identity, which is Syria, but rather to the Islamist identity, which is to Erdogan. So if anyone covering Syria doesn't understand these small differences, it will be like, I'm very sorry to say, but he will look very ignorant when he is addressing the issue from an imperialist point of view. And at the same time, it's saying that, for example, it's the brutal dictatorship and Assad is killing his own people.
Right. Right. I think there's a lack of understanding from the West, because they're not the occupied country, they're not the oppressed country. So they can say a statement that's contradictory, like Assad is a brutal dictator, but also I support Syrians, because they think that both can exist, even though that's not how it works. We, in America, we have politicians that are extremely corrupt, and Americans say, well, I don't support those politicians, I support something else. It doesn't always work like that in other places. And long debunks have been you would think, have been the attacks in Duma, the Syrian chemical attacks that Assad gassed his own people. And most independent media has caught up. I mean, you'll still see like the TYT people, talk about the white helmets in a positive way. You'll still see that, but it's slimmer and slimmer and less, which is a good thing. But who are the journalists that you look to expose that? Because that's been exposed for a while, and like I said, finally people are catching up and talking about it openly, but that's been exposed for a while. And I know I've had Vanessa Beeley on the show, I've had Eva Bartlett. Who are other journalists that you think have been exposing the truth about Syria?
First of all, TYT is not an independent media. TYT
Not at all. Yep.
It has a clear line, and they are infiltrating the anti-imperialist left-wing camp in the United States. They are infiltrators, and they are really dividing the left into an imperialist left and anti-imperialist left. It's like really funny when I watch their coverage, especially when it comes to Syria, and the level of ignorance is unreal. Like when I watch it, I feel like, how come these people call themselves journalists, right? But when you wanna like debunk these lies regarding Syria, first of all, go to Syria and ask the people on the ground. For example, when independent journalists such as Eva and Vanessa were in Aleppo, and they were on the humanitarian corridors when the Syrian army opened humanitarian corridors for the civilians to flee the eastern neighborhoods in late 2016. And everyone coming out and they're like interviewing people. Have you seen the white helmets? Do you know the white helmets? And people like, who are the white helmets? The people never heard of the white helmets. The white helmets is it's a British intelligence agency constructed organization. And their main mission is to, it's like a Hollywood team. They have a very sophisticated equipment, and they're just showing us the aftermath of events. They don't show the event, they don't put it into proper context. They only show what happened after the event, and they add some voiceovers or music over it. And people will be affected, right? We are all emotional people at the end of the day, and it's very easy to manipulate the emotions of the people, and they are really good at it. And this doesn't come like this. It's all about training and funding and all this montage. That's there is after processing happening, right? And it's so fast. Like in Aleppo, there was no internet. Like the electricity was cut and there was a blackout, and it was a war zone. And these white helmets guys, they have the fastest internet. I don't know if it's connected to the satellite, and they're just sending materials, right? So the first thing to do to understand this, ask the people. And please, no one tells me that you can't get a visa. Tourists can get a visa and journalists can get a visa. Only lazy people can't get a visa to Syria. And those who claim, and even people, I know people who are now, they changed their position a little bit regarding Syria. They were calling Assad like he's no different than ISIS and that he's a butcher and everything. And despite that, when they applied for a visa, they received a visa. So all this talk about that there is a dictatorship that doesn't grant a visa, it's an utter BS. So they can go there. And underground, like in my humble opinion, what Eva and Vanessa did, they really blew up the balloons of the lies of the mainstream media. And that is why they are smeared till today. And that is why they're called radicals, but they're not. They're really telling what happened there, and they're not being careerist. If they want to be careerist, they can repeat some of these CIA talking points and gain some jobs. And I want to mention this because for myself, I'm also considered a radical person, according to who? And we can't receive any jobs, we can't get any positions in media outlets, even if this media outlets, it has a line that is close to our line, right? So they prefer people who are more or less hypocrite, and they manipulate with their terms in order that they look objective on the surface, but they're not. They're not objective at all. And I'm really sad to see this because first of all, I'm not talking as a journalist now, I'm talking as a Syrian. It really hurts me to see people go to Syria and see the truth with their own eyes. And when they go out of Syria and they were like, yes, it's a horrible situation. It's a regime change war and the people are suffering. We need to lift the sanctions, but it's a brutal dictatorship. You are really spitting in our faces when you come to Syria and you see everything with your own eyes, and then you go out and tell something like that.